Hello. So yeah, this is really great to be here. I'm really honored to be part of Creative Mornings. I've been to a few, and now I'm speaking. Altera did me the favor of giving me the tricky topic of ethics, and so I'm gonna, try and broach the subject the best way I can. So in continuing her theme of asking questions to start the morning, how many people in the room would consider themselves, by their own definition, ethical? Wow. Everybody raise your hand, please. Okay, good. That was almost very concerning. How many people in the room would consider the company they work for to be ethical? Won't tell your bosses? Good? Most? Yeah? Okay. And how many people would sort of consider that, or think that maybe their company could be more ethical? Okay. All right. Now I have a sense of the room. Thank you for that. So as Altera mentioned, I work for a company called Reunion Island Coffee. It's a family business. My father started the company 21 years ago in 1995. And we are a importer, roaster, and wholesaler of sustainable coffees. So if you've seen these tiles, then you're familiar with our work from our cafe on Roncesvalles. Those are not my feet, by the way. They are nice shoes, but not me. So as a coffee roaster, we're right in the middle of this really tricky industry of coffee. So we are the conduit that takes coffee from the farms through the process and all the way to you, the consumer, and we are right in the middle of it. And if ethics are about what's right and wrong in the coffee business, that can't just be about what's right and wrong for me as a business person or me as an individual in that industry. It has to be about what's right for the entire industry and for all of the people involved and for the planet. And that presents some really difficult ethical questions. Coffee is an ethical minefield. I'm sure a lot of you have some kind of understanding of what that is. I think when people find out what I do, I often get asked about, people ask me about fair trade, what's that? People ask, or they call it free trade, and it's fair trade. It's a big pet peeve. I guess I have a bunch of people in a room. I can sort that one out for you guys at least right now. Fair trade, not free trade. People ask about organic farming, and just the general plight of coffee farmers. There's a lot, I think, more recently that's been in the news about it. And we really want to work towards creating a more sustainable industry for everybody, and sustainability really is the principle that our ethics at Reunion Island and for a lot of us in the coffee industry are founded on. So coffee is grown in some universally beautiful places by some really incredible people, and just to share with you guys a map of where coffee comes from. So you can see coffee grows between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. We call it the coffee belt. And outside of Hawaii, basically, coffee is pretty much all grown in the global south and mostly consumed in the global north. And this creates sort of the first real and major ethical dilemma in coffee, which is that there's this structural exploitation that goes on. Coffee is one of the most labor-intensive products in the world. The amount of work, if anybody's been to a coffee farm and they've seen it, the amount of work that goes in to producing a cup of coffee, the amount of times it has to be touched by hands on the farm, all the way through, it's on the farm, touched by several hands, it's processed, it's shipped, it gets to us as a roaster, we roast it, we pack it, we send it out again, it gets ground, water gets boiled to make it, someone stands over top of it for a few minutes, pours you a cup of coffee. There's a lot of work that goes into it. The majority of that work is done by the farmers, and they're done by farmers in all of these countries that are less, to be honest, less fortunate than us. And the average wage of a coffee farmer in most of these countries is under $3 a day. And if you want to know why a product that is so labor intensive is so inexpensive, it's the same reason things from China are very inexpensive, which is cheap labor. And so obviously this is the ethical dilemma that that is coffee, I would say, is probably most known for. And when we talk about coffee farmers, we're talking about people, they don't have the social programs that we have in Canada. They don't have the educational system. They don't have the healthcare system. And coffee farmers really are, they are the farmers at the end of the road. Coffee in all of these countries is grown high on mountains, and the road literally ends at a lot of coffee farms. And they are as far away from possible from the urban centers, from the places where these kinds of social programs might be available. And they make $3 a day for a very short period of time throughout the year. Coffee harvest happens once per year on a farm. And so you're making a very small amount of money, and that money has to be stretched out across an entire year through the thin months. And an unfortunate question that a lot of farmers have to end up asking themselves is, do I feed my family or do I feed my farm? And this is the kind of question that keeps me up at night, keeps a lot of people in coffee up at night, and it's the kind of thing that we really are trying to work to move past, to avoid, and create a better system of trade for these farmers. So the other interesting thing about the way this has kind of manifested itself is in a generational issue. So we're seeing the average age of coffee farmers is 56 and going up around the world. And the reason for that is that younger generations, people that grew up on coffee farms, they have the internet, they have cell phones, they have television, and they can see a better life for themselves in the cities. So there's this mass exodus from farms to the urban centers. And from a sustainability standpoint, we don't know who the next generation of farmers might be. Certainly not the one after that. And so if coffee is to sustain itself, it's getting really important for us as coffee people to really put our ethics towards the forefront. And that's something I'm going to get into a little bit. I really wanted to give you guys all sort of an understanding of the coffee industry, a little bit of a deeper understanding, and then in the second half kind of talk about our journey as a company towards going from a company that was ostensibly an ethical company to a company that really lives and dies by its ethics. So the other big structural problem in coffee is the way it's traded. So the crowd of people that's in this room right now, I'd imagine you probably all go to some pretty good cafes, probably a lot of independent cafes, and you might have seen the words direct trade on coffee. Direct trade's amazing. Direct trade's something I wholeheartedly believe in, but it's still a very small amount of the coffee that's traded in the world. It's just the part of it that we would all see a lot of. But probably about 95% of all the coffee in the world is traded on commodities markets, one in London and one in New York. And those markets are controlled by traders who can buy and sell coffee futures at their whim to make money. And they can inflate and deflate the market to their advantage, and they do. So right now, for instance, on the New York Coffee Futures Exchange, a pound of coffee is worth about $1.20. And just as a frame of reference, the average cost of production of a pound of coffee is about $1.60. So right now, farmers are, for the most part in the world, operating their farms at a loss. And obviously, this is a huge problem. When the cost of producing a cup of coffee doesn't have much to do with what we pay for it, we're taking away, the farmers are not empowered at all to make those kinds of decisions, and we're taking that away from them. And so we're really trying to fix, again, that structural problem in coffee. And this is, again, one of the other sort of major ethical dilemmas in the industry. On the other side of it, coffee is it's an extremely carbon-intensive process to get coffee from seed to cup. So I mentioned all of these different processes between picking, processing. Coffee gets washed and fermented on the farms. It gets processed again, yada, 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 all the way down the line. The majority, however, of the carbon footprint of coffee happens on our side, from roasting all the way through to consumption and disposal. And so this is an environmental dilemma. And you'll find a lot of coffee people are also environmentalists. And this is why. I guess you could say a lot of it's driven by guilt. But we are all living we're living and dying on the backs of coffee farmers, and to the detriment of the environment. And the amount of carbon that it takes to have a cup of coffee in the morning. I won't share the exact numbers with you because it's a little scary, and quite honestly, I want everybody to keep drinking coffee. But maybe, you know, things like paper cups and you know, the way that cafes are operating, these are really massive proportions of the carbon footprint of coffee. And so it's just something to think about as a consumer. Bring a mug. I brought a mug today. I thought it'd be really bad if I was up here talking about sustainability and ethics and I was drinking out of a paper cup, but I'm looking at a lot of paper cups right now, so maybe that just makes me look like a dick. All right. So with all of that said, I feel bad. I've started this whole thing off with a lot of bad news about coffee. Hopefully this isn't you know, I'm not convincing any of you to stop drinking coffee, and I'll try and talk you all off the ledge if that's the case. But I think I used to ask this question to myself, and I've talked to some people much smarter than me about it, and they've given me the confidence to keep going, is why shouldn't it be, why isn't it our ethical responsibility to convince farmers to stop farming? If it is this, if all of this stuff is true about coffee farming, shouldn't we stop doing it? And shouldn't we stop drinking coffee and find some sort of solution? Well, there's a few reasons why not. First of all, we're not going to do it. As much as I want to believe that coffee is a necessity, it's not. So there is no nutritional value to coffee. We don't technically need coffee, although we all really enjoy it. But we don't need coffee, and we're going to continue to drink it. And so there's, you know, it's better that we try and find a more positive way of operating in this industry than we leave it to people who are going to just continue to take advantage of farmers and of the environment. A lot of farmers don't have the option to stop growing, whether it's cultural or it's the farm that they're on that you know, isn't appropriate to grow their things. It's not just as easy as to say, oh, just grow some mangoes and some avocados and some potatoes. It's not as easy as that. They still need cash, and they need money, and coffee is a good cash crop when it works properly. And we've seen it work properly. It happens. It's unfortunately not happening now with the commodities market, but there is a better way to do it. We've seen it. And with that, my last point is that coffee, from what I've seen in the world, coffee really can be a force for good. Coffee can help save the world from itself. The coffee industry is massive. There are tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people who work and live and survive within the coffee industry. And so what that looks like to me is this potential to bring everybody up. We can rise the tide, whatever. You know what I'm saying. We can bring up the tide for all of these people, and really, I mean, just getting extra money every day, paying extra money. If we pay extra money and we pass it along to you, and you're comfortable paying extra money for a good cup of coffee that's ethically sourced, getting that extra money into the hands of people in the countries that are on that map is only going to do good in the world. More money into their hands will help solve a lot of the problems. And so, yeah, coffee can be a force for good in the world, and this was something that I realized as I got into the coffee industry. So I'm one of the lucky ones. When you talk about family businesses, often, you know, you hear about these horror stories of people getting kind of stuck in them. I happen to fall into just the best business that I could ever imagine falling into, and I really fell in love with coffee very early on in my life. I was literally born into coffee, and not literally born into coffee. That's I hate it when people use literally wrong, and that was a big one. Okay, so but I've been around coffee my whole life, and the real beginning of it for me was just before I started the company. It was 11, 12 years ago. I got a call from my dad. I was still at university, and he asked me about fair trade. Fair trade, it was just kind of getting going. It's been around for probably 20, 25 years in a real way, but it was really just hippie for a long time. And it started coming into the mainstream, and he called me and asked me, is this a thing? Is this going to be, is this a trend, or is it a real thing that's going to stick around? Should we get into it? Of course, I said, absolutely, let's get into it. Let's do it. We start buying some fair trade coffees, and we have this fair trade lineup within the bigger, broader company. And it did okay, but it wasn't a huge seller. And what happened for me, the more important part was that it got me more interested in the world of coffee beyond what we were doing. A lot of coffee to this point in my life, it's bought off a computer screen. We get samples, we get prices emailed to us, you buy coffee and you go from there. We don't put a face to the product. And I really wanted to start doing that, so I started to travel. And this is where the sort of the moral obligation, I think, for a lot of coffee people comes from, is that we all travel to the farms that we do business with. Most of us do. We love doing this. It's the best part of our jobs. Coffee harvest comes in Central America in January, February, perfect time to go south. And we love going and visiting these people, and I think a lot of it comes from having stood in front of them and shaking their hands and wanting to do better by them. But starting to go down this route put us into the first stage of our our journey towards becoming the company we are now, that known for our ethics and our sustainability, which is the time in my life when everybody just kind of said, you're crazy. And I was crazy because I wanted to travel. I was crazy. I wanted to go to country. I didn't speak Spanish. There was some questionable safety issues, particularly in Guatemala. And that was really the first major trip I took. I spent a couple weeks in Guatemala, and I visited every kind of farm that existed: fair trade, organic, Rainforest Alliance certified, big, small. And I saw kind of it all in that short period of time. I saw really bad working conditions. I saw children working on farms. I saw horrible living conditions, dirt floors with little mats on them that people were sleeping, and people that could only afford to eat a couple tortillas and an avocado every day. But I also saw fair trade farms and Rainforest Alliance certified farms and larger estate farms where people were being really well taken care of. They had food. They had access to some health care. They had education being brought in for their kids. Like there was schools built on the farms, or buses to schools. And so with that, I was able to not just see the plight of the coffee farmer, but I was also able to see the potential. And the potential is a really important part, because that's where we can, again, bring everybody to. Also happened to be the first place that we developed our first direct trade relationship in Guatemala. It's a farm we still do business with today. We visited 3 or 4 times, I think now. It's called La Soledad. And this was the first time I visited the farm, Rainforest Alliance certified, sitting down. I was across the table, their kitchen table, in the farmhouse with them. And it was the first time I was ever able to ask the farmer, not how much can you sell me your coffee for and get into a negotiation, but I asked the question, how much do you need to sell your coffee to me for? So the idea is not just to give them enough money to survive, but give them the money and the support to thrive. And that's then the question, that's when the way we like to talk to our farmers ever since, is asking them what they need from us. And that might be more money, might be support through an NGO or a social program, but we always ask that question when we do business. So at the time, 10 years ago though, 8, 9, 10 years ago, you can imagine, this was kind of crazy. This was not the way that people operated. It was just getting going. Direct trade has been around for probably about 15 years in a real way, through some amazing companies that blazed a trail, but it was not the way that most business was done. And so I heard a lot of this here crazy talk, and people really thought, there was like legitimate concern that I was going to probably bankrupt the company. Didn't, but there was concern from some people. And this kind of took us into the next stage of the business, which was the, oh, that's cute phase. I managed to work a photo of my dog into the slides. And so the, oh, that's cute stage is kind of when it's getting a little bit popular. We really just sort of redoubled our efforts after starting to work with more farms and certifiers, and we took on a lot of causes. And this is why it was kind of people telling me that it was cute. I was the boss's kid, had a lot of causes, I had a good spirit, I was all full of piss and vinegar. And I heard a lot of this it was kind of condescending, but I didn't really care, because I could see, continued to travel, I continued to see that there was change going on in the industry, and that we were a part of that change. And so I had a lot of confidence in what we were doing at the time. But we took on a lot of causes. So we started working, we made our first real major step to become a more environmentally friendly roaster by working with Bullfrog Power. So we've worked with them for almost, I think, 7 or 8 years now. So that's renewable energy. We took that piece of our carbon footprint off the map. and really drew a line in the sand and said, we are going to be an environmentally friendly company. We're going to consider those things and not just turn a blind eye to them, which is by far the easier and less expensive way of doing things. We started working with a lot more NGOs that built schools, that did cervical cancer screenings on coffee farming communities, that created better opportunities for coffee families. And we started working more with certifiers like Fair Trade, organic coffees. One we really started to work with a lot was called Rainforest Alliance. I really encourage everybody to check them out. It's a great organization that looks at sustainability on coffee farms in a very holistic way, which I really appreciate, economically, socially, and environmentally. And so we were doing all of these things, and we were being told that it was all very nice, but it wasn't changing our business outside of the door of our doors. We were still buying really good quality coffee. We still had these things kind of segregated off into sort of like an ethical bunch of coffees and then our sort of conventional bunch of coffees. And not everybody was not a lot of people still at this point were fully bought in, including our own staff. And so what we started to do was take away the options. And this is where we start this stage that was like, we're starting to open doors with all this stuff. We happened upon some good timing that 5 years ago, all of this stuff that I'm talking about, it was in the news. It was starting to get really, it was fashionable to care all of a sudden. And we had been doing this for 5-6 years already, so we were able to sort of capitalize on this. And we marketed ourselves, I think, well, and we talked about it, and we like to tell stories. But we got to this point where we were willing to sort of absorb some of the extra costs and build them into our business of being an ethical and sustainable coffee roaster. And with that, taking away the choice. So we didn't make it exorbitantly more expensive to make those ethical choices. The choice was to do business with us. And so you can do business with us for any number of these reasons, and you get sustainability programs built right into the way you do things. And this is where it started opening doors. Companies started coming to us, cafes, restaurants, larger companies started coming to us and saying, we hear you're doing these kinds of things, tell us about it. And it wasn't the reason that we were making deals, but it was helping us out quite a lot. And we really had we grew the confidence to preach and to reach and really try and tell those stories and try and make this a thing. And like I said, I think it was really some very good timing on our part that we had been working on this, not knowing that it was going to become sort of fashionable. And that sort of culminates with where we are now, which is we're all in. And we've gone from the sustainability programs and being an ethical roaster, we've gone from that opening doors to closing deals. And it's become who we are in a complete and holistic way. And that all culminates for me with, in 2 years ago, we got our BCorp certification. So for those who don't know what BCorp is, the B stands for benefit. It fits into this gray area between a for-profit business and a nonprofit. So we work to the social good. And so what it did, it was all the work that we had done over the past 10 years, they quantify everything and they validate everything that we do, or it's a validating process at least for everything we do, but they go over it. You fill out this massive assessment, you have to reach a certain score, then they audit you. And they look at everything from your governance, your transparency, how you treat your employees, which is very important, how you treat the environment, and how you look at your supply chain. And so they look at all of this, and it's not just about me doing all of this nice stuff and putting it on a poster and saying, hey, we're ethical, we're sustainable. This is us putting our money where our mouth is and proving it within this certification. And it is very similar to sort of, this is what fair trade is to a coffee farm, BCorp is to an ethical business. So it's certifying us as a social enterprise. And at this point, now we have a reputation. This is a hard-earned reputation that we've come to, and it's really like in the last few years, probably the biggest and some of the best customers we've taken on were because of these programs. And so it was a real point of pride for us to be able to do that. And I guess for me, the big takeaway at the end of this, because I really, when we started down this path, didn't know how it was going to go, didn't know what was going to happen. And the big takeaway for me is that I thought we were going to have to succeed in spite of all of these programs, in spite of the additional costs, in spite of the additional work that went into it. And we ended up succeeding because of it. And that for me is a real point of pride, that our ethic, we were able to sort of fill out our, become this ethical company and really live our ethics, and it wasn't detrimental to the business. And I guess just to finish up, the one thing I always like to say is that, like, we, as a bunch of young people who are sort of coming up and starting your own companies and becoming decision makers, it's important to know that our capacity to affect real and positive change in the world is limited only by our willingness to do it. And that's really it at the end of the day. If you want to do it, you can, and it's not going to hold you back. Thank you.